With the iPhone Air, it feels like Apple may have hit the physical limit of thinness, but whether or not this device actually holds up in everyday use isn't so obvious. What's up, friends? I'm Brian MacDuff, aka BMac, and welcome to another video. Today we're taking a deep look at the iPhone Air and discussing whether or not it's truly a work of art and whether or not its sacrifices start to change how it feels to actually live with. A quick thanks to Apple for loaning out an iPhone Air for me to be able to check out and test, so Apple, thank you. But with that having been said, let's get right into the design of the iPhone Air, because it looks like Apple finally nailed the form, but the trade-offs that it comes with may or may not be worth it. When you hold the iPhone Air, you cannot help but think, wow. And it is a testament to how far we pushed modern day technology with hardware efficiency in mind, but not without costs. But starting things out with the iPhone Air is the use of a titanium material with upgraded, more scratch resistant and an anti-reflective Ceramic Shield 2 glass front with Ceramic Shield 1 on the back. And despite being just over 5 millimeters thick or just under 1/4 of an inch thick, you still get all of your physical buttons, including the camera control button. All that while still not feeling fragile. You could, with all your strength, try to bend this thing in half, even against a table if you wanted to for leverage, and it does not show the flex that you'd expect from something this thin. And the weight is pretty much just as wild. It's only 5.82 ounces or 165 grams, and it still maintains an IP68 dust and water resistance protection rating. In terms of colors, it is available in space black, cloud white, light gold, or sky blue colors, all of which, per usual, look very pretty. It is nothing short of impressive what Apple has managed to pull off here with balancing extreme thinness with extreme strength. But there are consequences that do show up in places you might not expect. Despite all that Apple is including in the iPhone Air, it unfortunately only comes with one speaker. So you do not get stereo speakers, which probably matters less for music than it does for TV shows and movies. The lack of stereo speakers and only having one mono speaker on the top of the device, which then shifts to the side when you're watching content in the landscape orientation, is rather jarring. It almost sounds like something is wrong because I feel like we're so accustomed to stereo speakers now, and if you do a lot of video watching on your iPhone, especially in the landscape orientation, you are going to notice this single speaker and wish it had top and bottom stereo speakers instead. So once the shock of the iPhone Air thinness wears off a little bit, the display becomes the next test. Does it feel fully uncompromised, or did Apple have to give something up to make this design work? Despite its thin size, the iPhone Air still does pack a rather large 6.5-inch 10-bit LTPO OLED 1:120Hz HDR10+ and Dolby Vision always on display. Love to see that. I'm a huge Dolby Vision fan, and all this is complete with Face ID, the dynamic island, and a 460 ppi pixel density rating. But there is also a new feature you're getting in the iPhone Air that you're getting across the entire iPhone 17 series actually, called Display Pulse Smoothing, which is actually designed to help users sensitive to OLED flicker by altering pulse width modulation, or PWM. I immediately turned it on. I'm not usually prone to headaches or eye strain when using these displays, but I figure it's a feature that could only help me, not hurt me, so I love to see Apple adding this here, and it's awesome, especially for sensitive users. In terms of brightness, the iPhone Air gets the same brightness boost that the other iPhone 17 models got this year, with the ability to actually get up to 3,000 nits of peak brightness when outside, up from the previous 2,000 nits of peak brightness. You do also get that anti-reflectivity coating with Ceramic Shield 2 here on the iPhone Air, which is not something you necessarily will notice right away, but if you look side by side and put the iPhone Air next to the 16 Pro, you're gonna see the difference, and it's subtle, but it's nice to see that added here. So the iPhone Air display didn't raise any immediate red flags to me. In day-to-day use and even on paper, it pretty closely mirrors that of what you get on the iPhone 17 Pro Max, which only sharpens the contrast of what comes next. So speaking of drawbacks, the camera system on the iPhone Air forces the big question of, is one camera actually enough? Or does thinness finally take something away here? On the iPhone Air, you get only a total of 2 cameras. You get a selfie camera, which we'll talk more about in just a second, and a single rear-facing camera. That's it. Apple keeps positioning this as one camera being enough on the iPhone Air, and whether or not that's true depends entirely on how you actually shoot. More specifically, you are getting a single 48 megapixel f1.6 Fusion main camera with sensor shift OIS, plus a new 18 megapixel f1.9 center stage selfie camera. Starting things out with a Fusion camera, this is one of the clearest compromises that Apple is asking you to take with the iPhone Air. The idea here is that you are getting one main 48 megapixel camera system that can carry you through the focal lengths that most people actually use the most, delivering both 1x and optical quality 2x shots from a single sensor. You get 1x and 2x without losing optical quality, but you are losing entire perspectives that only dedicated lenses can give you, such as with the ultra-wide 0.5x and the 4x plus tele lenses, and those are the trade-offs that start to change how you actually shoot with this device. If you rarely use an ultra-wide camera or zoom in your photos past 2x when taking them, this setup might actually cover most everyday shots for you, depending on how you actually use your phone. You are gonna be capped off at 4K 60 frames per second on the iPhone Air, which includes Dolby Vision, and then you also do have slow motion, but that's gonna top out at 1080p 240 frames per second. But there's also no Apple Log video recording support here on the iPhone Air, despite its performance capabilities, which we're about to talk about. But one camera where you do not need to make a sacrifice is with the new 18 megapixel center stage selfie camera that is built off of a new square sensor. And this is one of those changes that sounds great on paper, but feels very different once you actually start shooting with it. And to understand why, you need to understand how Apple changed the way the selfie camera works across the entire iPhone 17 series line. The selfie camera now is an 18 megapixel f1.9 center stage camera backed by a new square-shaped sensor that's present on all devices within the iPhone 17 series. More specifically, within the native iPhone camera app, you can now shoot in either 3x4 or 4x3 selfie photo ratios and either 16:9 or 9:16 video without ever having to rotate your device. With, if you wanted to, the ability to utilize that additional resolution for taking up to 18 megapixel RAW photos. But for video, this is actually where the workflow shift actually shows up, because video, instead of photo, is actually a little bit trickier in the way it's utilizing this square sensor. Simply put, you do not get the same larger field of view when shooting video like you get with photo. You do get OpenGate video recording supported in third-party apps, which lets you shoot video in 3840 by 3840 resolution, meaning you can get 4K portrait and 4K landscape video crops from the same original clip without losing any resolution. That does mean I think you should probably just shoot everything in OpenGate, but I know what you're probably wondering, with an iPhone this thin, performance is probably where you'd expect cracks to show, if they're gonna show up at all. Housed within the iPhone Air is the Apple A19 Pro chipset, the same exact chip that you're getting in the iPhone 17 Pro model this year. And you're also getting the same amount of RAM across all the storage configuration models. So that's gonna be 12 gigs of RAM in either 256 gig, 512 gig, or 1 terabyte storage options. We're also getting Bluetooth 6.0, but still only with support for the SBC and AAC audio codecs, which is a bummer for me. At any given time, I'm usually testing out or reviewing or using earbuds and headphones that support the higher resolution LDAC audio codec. And to be honest, I'm very surprised that in this day and age, we still do not have LDAC audio codec support on the iPhone. But with raw performance power, honestly, it's getting a little harder to gauge performance boosts without benchmarks, because for my gaming, photo editing, and video editing work over the last couple of years, all iPhone models have been pretty solid in their own right. But still, looking at performance in isolation, benchmarks do show a measurable bump with the A19 Pro, which lines up with how unconstrained this device feels to use in the real world. With my usual performance tests, I never felt meaningfully held back by the iPhone Air, which honestly is so surprising given how thin and tightly packed this thing actually is. It is also worth pointing out that the USB port on the iPhone Air is only USB 2, not USB 3, like it is on the iPhone 17 Pro series, which is probably fine for most people, but also a limitation to know about, and a somewhat surprising one, because we seem to be having more Pro features on this device than you might expect, but not with the USB port. Regardless, USB 2 here for USB-C. But even with all that taken into consideration, the surprising performance of this remarkably thin iPhone Air does not completely erase the other trade-offs that this device introduces. So we might as well talk about it now. We'll talk about iPhone Air battery life, because this is a category where ultra-thin phones usually fall apart. So the real question becomes whether or not the iPhone Air keeps up, or changes how you're gonna have to go about planning your day. Housed within the iPhone Air is a 3,149 milliampere hour battery, which is rather impressive given everything else that still has to fit inside this device. Even with that, the battery life on this thing honestly surprised me. It does not completely erase the trade-offs that come with a thinner phone, but it surprised me. I didn't have nearly as much battery anxiety with the iPhone Air as I was expecting myself to, even with its smaller battery. And even if you do run the battery down, this thing is so darn thin that you could basically just pop on a MagSafe power bank onto the back of it, and it's gonna become the thickness of a regular phone at that point, while it's charging. But speaking of charging, the iPhone Air is capable of charging at 20 watts wired or wirelessly via Qi 2 at 20 watts with MagSafe charging, which should give you a roughly 0 to 50% charge in just about 30 minutes, whether wired or wirelessly, and you still do have 4.5 watts of reverse wire charging for emergencies. Just like with the rest of the iPhone 17 lineup this year, this might not be the fastest smartphone charging on the market, but for daily use, it's rarely a decision I actually had to plan around as it relates to my charging processes. So with all this having been said, did Apple perfect the form of a smartphone with the iPhone Air, or did they push thinness so far that compromises outweigh the design? After living with the iPhone Air for several months now, I think this device is a lot better than it's being portrayed, and it's a lot better than I actually expected it to be, as long as you understand what Apple is trying to do here with this device. The iPhone Air feels like the realistic limit of how thin a modern smartphone can get right before the compromises start to define the experience. The display on the iPhone Air never felt compromised, performance for me was never an issue, and battery life was more livable than I expected for something this thin. But I think where the iPhone Air draws a very clear line is with hardware flexibility, especially with that single rear-facing camera system and with the single speaker instead of stereo speakers. I know that Apple's positioning this as one great camera being enough and that it's more of a system than just a single camera, and for some people that's absolutely going to be true. But for me, and probably for a lot of others, losing dedicated camera perspectives fundamentally is going to change how you shoot with the camera on your smartphone, and that's where I think the iPhone Air becomes divisive. The iPhone Air is not for everyone. It is not an iPhone Pro Series replacement, although arguably it gets closer to it than I thought it would be, and it is not a value-focused option either. This iPhone is a design-first iPhone built for customers who prioritize feel, thinness, and engineering over versatility. If that trade-off makes sense to you, then the iPhone Air delivers something genuinely different and yet still very intentional. If not, the compromises you're forced into making here with the iPhone Air probably will not be worth it, no matter how impressive this thinness and this overall design is. The decision, ultimately, is gonna be up to you. As always, for the latest deals, prices, promos, and information for the iPhone Air, you can of course always head to my affiliate link, bmac.link/iPhone Air, or of course, as always, there will be clickable links in the video description box and in the comment section below, so check those out. This thing is so darn thin, it's so darn light that I'm gonna see if I can make it levitate. Let's see if I can make it float. Go back to my magic days. Not happening. I will see you guys in my next video.